today. So we have two speakers for you. We have Graham and Natalie. Graham is the Director of Scottish Mediation and has been since 2012. He's worked extensively in third and public sector for various different organisations. And Natalie has been a workplace mediator since 2016, as well as an HR consultant, and brings lots of practical experience around dispute resolution online in public, private and third sector. Both of them will spend 10 to 15 minutes talking you through their slide deck, and then we will open it out to questions and answers. It'd be great to hear from some of you if you want to post comments and observations in the chat box or ask your questions as you remember them. And it just now leaves me to pass you over to Graham now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all today. The work that CIPD does is very important, and there's many occasions where I will find myself quoting CIPD research and workplace conflict, because I think as an organisation you do a lot to dig deep into some of the stuff that goes on in the workplace, which helps everyone who has an involvement there understand and be able to use positive interventions. Just a quick bit about Scottish Mediation. We're a registered membership charity, and we've been going since the beginning of the 2000s. And we've got a number of different focuses for our work. One of the prime ones is that we are striving for excellence from the mediators that provide mediation in Scotland, and we do that through having a register of mediators, organising CPD and events, and we also do accreditation work for people who provide training for mediators to be able to reach those standards. We do a fair amount of work around policy. Last year we produced a fairly significant document around mediation in the civil justice system, but we do so across a number of different areas, including planning, and that's an area that we find to be very productive. And what we're doing in that area is seeking to see where we can embed mediation as a process into the everyday lives of people across the country. We also run a number of different projects where we've sought to promote mediation in particular areas. So we've been working with the third sector for a number of years and have a third sector mediation scheme. We're currently working with the rented housing sector, seeking to provide the skills of mediation to housing agents and letting agents. But we also have a fairly significant amount of work that we do with schools, where we give young people in schools the skills of being mediators, and then they run their own peer mediation schemes in the schools. That's one that's very much one where we're building on skills for the future and skills for life. The final thing that we do is we run a helpline, a public helpline, so that any member of the public or any organisation can phone up and ask us about mediation, and we can then either point them to the right organisation, or we might indeed connect them with a mediator if they're actually looking for somebody to resolve a dispute. So that's just a wee bit about us. What Natalie and I are going to be covering today is about what mediation is, and particularly what's different about things online. But I'd like to start by talking firstly just a bit about what mediation is and how it works. So, often described as a facilitated conversation, and I think the idea around mediation as a facilitated conversation is that sometimes you need a bit of help for a conversation, and the mediator can be a third party who's not involved in what's maybe gone on before, and is maybe seen by people as being neutral, so somebody who can hold that space. It requires a particular skill set, and it's a skill set which I think is shared with a number of other disciplines, but mediation brings it together in a particular way. And those sorts of skills I would have as being questioning skills, listening skills, the ability to reframe, and then how mediators can then deploy them from anything from a one-to-one situation to a large group of people. Some of the work that I know our workplace mediators do in places like Dundee University They do an amazing work where groups have become dysfunctional, and a mediator can often go in and help people in that instance. I think the other thing you'd say about mediation is when it comes to the formal bit, it's a process, and that by going through particular stages, it allows people an opportunity to be able to hear, vent, and explore, and then hopefully in the end ID some common ground, but to do so in a safe space. And one of the key things is that the mediator is the person who's able to create that safe space. So what's it for? And I've put up the words disagreement and disputes. One of the bits of research Scottish Mediation did recently was that quite often people might be in a dispute, but they don't want to call it a dispute. And so people are quite often more comfortable saying, I've got a disagreement with somebody that I need a bit of assistance with. And that can be things like a toxic relationship. It could be problems people might have working together. It could be a personality clash. And quite often those things can end up becoming something more formal, such as a grievance, something to do with performance management, or perhaps a complaint. And certainly mediation is designed to be able, I think as Lee pointed out at the beginning, it's particularly useful when it's used early and before you start invoking formal processes, because there's quite often an opportunity there to be able to rebuild a relationship and allow people to continue working together. And I think when you look at the workplace, that's one of the major plus points of being able to use mediation that I can see. And I think the other thing it allows people to do is to have a conversation. I mean, I mentioned that we do work in schools training school students on how to use mediation. And I think that one of the things that sometimes we're not so good at is remembering how to have a conversation. Things like social media have made things very much one side or another side, and quite often there's a lot of space in between those, which it's very useful to be able to explore. So how does mediation work? One of the key aspects of mediation is that it works on the basis of self-determination. And I suppose the best way of describing that initially would be to contrast it with the idea, say, you might get from a tribunal. It's somebody, you go to somebody, a colleague that you might have a disagreement or dispute as, goes to that person, and they make a ruling on that. They hear the evidence and decide. In mediation, the idea is that the parties decide, and the role of the mediator is to get the parties into a space where they can have a conversation and explore issues that allows them to come up with the solution themselves. And I think that's quite an important thing, because certainly experience that I've seen in terms of mediated disputes is that quite often if the parties come up with the solutions, then quite often those solutions stick an awful lot better. Mediators will use a number of things in discussions with parties. One of them I find I use quite often is what we would call reality testing. Quite often a mediator in a private conversation with parties will try and explore how realistic something is, because quite often people have a view about other people and what they expect of other people, which might be unrealistic, and that's a useful space to be able to explore some of that. But I think the other thing about mediation, the mediators talk quite often about, would be what we would call the balcony. Mediators will try and allow people to look to the future, to see how things might be. And certainly one of the things I've often used in a mediation would be to ask a question to a party: how do you think it would feel for you if you were able to come into work with that dispute resolved and that relationship prepared? And I think by giving that forward focus, mediators are able to allow people to think in a positive way, where quite often, if you're looking back on things, all you can come up with is what happened, why I didn't like that, and why, therefore, I'm feeling uncomfortable about where I'm working. So if you have identified that you want to go ahead with some mediation, how would you get a mediator? There's a number of different ways that you could do so. The first one would be give us a ring on the Scottish Mediation Helpline. We can give you advice on suitability of a dispute, because we've found out in many of the conversations that we've had that people are often not sure about when to use mediation, and so it might be useful to talk that through with somebody, and that's certainly something that we could provide. From that, if you wanted us to, and I say if you wanted us to, because that's very important, we would connect you with a mediator. And I always say to people, once you've had that conversation with the mediator, make sure you're happy that the mediator is the right person for you, because one of the things a mediator would seek to do is to establish a good rapport with you, make sure that they understand you, make sure that they understand your dispute or disagreement, and that that person then is the right person to help you. If you want to look yourself, we have a section on our site called Find a Mediator, which allows you to search by discipline, so you can search specifically under workplace, and you can also search under geography. Clearly today, we're talking about online mediation, and so where somebody is based won't be as relevant as it might be were people to be able to have meetings in rooms, but it's a useful function anyway. It's often the case, I think, that people will find a mediator through recommendation. Through networks, people will go seek advice from colleagues, and that's often a very good route to use as well. We certainly wouldn't suggest not using that route, because sometimes just the confidence of a colleague can be a useful positive in selecting somebody. The final thing I would say about getting a mediator is just to check that your mediator is properly qualified. As I say, we operate a register. There'll be some lawyers who will be mediators who will be on the Law Society register as well. And all of those mediators have to meet a certain quality and standards. And if you're either on any of those registers, then you'll also have a form of redress if things go wrong, and that you could raise concerns if you were unhappy about either the mediator or the service that you had received. So just from my point, just a final bit about how mediation as a process works. And I think one of the things that we've been reflecting on in Scottish mediation is about how these processes then work online. And one of the things we're strongly recommending is that in an initial meeting, and a mediator will normally meet with the parties separately. Sometimes out with the lockdown situation, that might be by telephone. Quite often it might be in person as well. But we recommend that if you're going to be using, say, an online conferencing facility such as Zoom or WebEx or wherever, that you try and meet the parties in your pre-meetings in the same way that you would meet when the mediation actually happens. That can help to build a bit of confidence about the technology if people are needing a bit of assistance with that. But also, if that's the way that you're establishing rapport with the people that you're dealing with, then that will be consistent when you go to the next steps. When the mediation itself will take place, and I think one of the major advantages of online is that a mediator can then have that space at any time, and it doesn't involve parties travelling. You're not having to worry about neutral venues. People can be in their own space. Once that process starts, the main 5 stages that we would operate would start with an introduction. The mediator would primarily be telling people about their expectations of how the process will work, about the rules, confidentiality. Quite an important thing a mediator will talk about is the importance of each party listening to each party whilst the other one is speaking. And should somebody not do that, that's an area where the mediator would intervene and remind people about how they'd like things to proceed. There would normally be some sort of exchange of statements. If I'm mediating, I'll usually ask people to try and frame that in, why are you here and what would you like to see happen? Because I always try and have a bit of forward-facing in it, even at the beginning of the mediation. There would then be some scope for exchange, because if people have a disagreement, a dispute, then they're not going to agree about everything, and so once somebody said something, they might want the opportunity to respond, maybe ask a question, put forward their own point of view. We would then seek to move to what you might call a problem-solving area. So that might involve a bit of individual work between the mediator and the parties. It might involve some work together. Different mediators will use different techniques, different questioning. They might use a flip chart. They might use all sorts of different things, and that's one of the areas where mediators will tend to vary fairly significantly. And then through that, Should that process have been successful, the mediator will then seek to have some form of agreement between the parties about how things will be, what will happen next, and how people will behave in the future. And included in that will be, and what happens should something happen again, because it's quite important to be able to think about how people might go if things don't work out, and how they might be able to resolve things in the future. I think the other thing I would say about that is I've outlined 5 stages there from introduction through to agreement. It looks linear on that slide, but that's not necessarily how it will pan out. And sometimes you might find yourself going in between some of those things. You might be in the middle of problem solving, and then actually you need to go back and have a bit more exchange between the parties. I've even been in the situation where we've had parties signing an agreement, and then we've had to go back again because somebody, you've asked the question, is there anything else? And somebody then comes up with something that just torpedoes everything. So it's not necessarily linear, and that's one of the things that you'd be employing a mediator to do, is to manage that process in a way which allows the right things to happen. So that's all I want to say. I'm now going to pass over to Natalie, who's going to talk about the challenges and benefits of using online mediation. And I would say at this point, as someone who has done work for our helpline and who I know has been doing some online mediation, so a bit of particular expertise there.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. I guess with the times we have had no option and no choice but to move online. But for me, I absolutely think there are some really good benefits as to working this way for both the mediator and the parties. And actually, this could be a really good option in the future. So I'll just talk you through from my experience in terms of the benefits and some of the challenges. Now, the benefits for me, it's been just as, maybe even more sometimes, successful in the sessions. For the sessions I have delivered, mediation took place and mediation was successful. And you might not always get to that, and it's not my job to make it successful. I'm there as the facilitator, but from my experience so far, I would absolutely be giving you some taste in terms of what online's all about and getting you to think about it. It does remove the physicality associated with in-person mediation. What you find in the majority of the situation, it's all about heightened emotions, mistrust, fear, and this can lead to enormous stress and anxiety in face-to-face situations. I have seen people turn up at their sessions in tears, in rage, in a variety, and actually getting them through the front door sometimes is a challenge. And many people that face mediation have told me the night before that they've had some sleepless nights just with the thought of seeing the person face to face. So for me, moving to online has helped diffuse those tense situations. Of course, there will still be fear, mistrust, and heightened emotions, but there's something different about speaking through a screen rather than sitting face to face with someone. And the benefits, it is designed to be efficient. So for me, I feel that there's much more of a push for parties to reach an agreement. And if they don't reach an agreement, that's okay. But really, for me, online mediation has enabled that process to happen in a much more efficient way. And in what were the bizarre times that we're working in at the moment, where people are unable to travel or simply want to limit their exposure due to shielding or living with someone that's shielding, there is no longer an excuse. These people can absolutely help mediation take place. And what's always great is there's no last train scenario, because people aren't really getting on trains. So when we get to the point of trying to reach the agreement and one party's maybe particularly looking a bit anxious, or they've maybe said to us at the beginning of the session, I've had this a lot, or even the referrer has said, mediation actually needs to finish at 4 o'clock, I can't have it going on any longer. And timeframes are really important, but the process is also really important. So maybe where people have said, I really need to go, my train's going, well, that in online mediation has maybe not been as popular or taken up as before. And actually it can happen faster and be completed all in the same day. There is obviously no particular timescales involved in mediation. For me, the most success I've had is the flow of the same day. Now that can be hard taking into account travel time, logistics, but if it's mapped out correctly during online, yes, very tiring for both parties and the mediator, but it can happen. And actually, when being appointed as a mediator, my diary is a lot better, not thinking about travel, and the parties, the majority of time, want it happen as soon as possible. So where they have the option of sitting in the comfort of their own home and actually just being available tomorrow may also be a better opportunity for the mediation to take place. I did feel during the sessions that I had more control. Maybe it's because I had the power of the mute buttons, I don't know, but I did feel a bit more in control at times where the dispute maybe blows, and that's okay, that's the reality of what happens. But sometimes you feel and you're on your feet constantly thinking how you're going to get the control back. But during online mediation, I certainly felt, for some reason, a bit more control over the process. You can mute people, you can push people into other rooms, you can pause the mediation yourself, but I felt more comfortable on the control element. And logistical issues are reduced. So when we are appointed as a mediator, there's a big piece of work in terms of all the logistics to make the process happen. And that may be, do we have 2 rooms, for example? And sometimes when it's happening maybe at a neutral location, such as a hotel, for example, there will be 2 bedrooms that have to be booked out. And sometimes that's not ideal, or the cost is not ideal. But 2 rooms on a platform does not matter or make any issue at all. So for me, the benefits have been great. Of course, there will be challenges, but for all of these, you're absolutely able to work through. It is still fairly new for indeed some parties and some referrers and businesses, and they may be sceptical. The last one that I done, the party phoned me and said, Natalie, I'm just not sure. Are you sure this is going to work? Have you done this before? So these are all the questions that we're able to answer as mediators, and it is still fairly new, but I got great feedback in terms of that was actually quite good and worked more than what I thought would have done face-to-face. But remember, you might be met with some resistance and have to talk about the challenges and the benefits of mediation for people to come on board with you. The biggest challenge I feel is building trust is harder. It's much harder than face-to-face. So you need to get familiar with the technology, because you can't be on this seamless process with technology trying to build trust and things happen, or you can't be sitting eyes down trying to navigate the technology through the process. So you need to be able to build that trust by the body language and just rely that the technology will work. There may be a few glitches, absolutely, but we almost need to replicate the face-to-face relationship that we have. So for you, if that means that we need to maybe get familiar, have a quick run through before I done on various platforms, I would have the same number of people that I would have in mediation session, and I done a quick run through to make sure that the process could just go as swimmingly as possible online. The speaker view as well for body language is very important, and you do need to tell parties about the speaker view because people might not know. So that's where literally each party, when they exchange, only sees each other. I don't want them seeing me, to be honest. I need to be in the background at that stage. So I want them to be able to see each other and pointing them in the direction to have that contact. And actually, that could be very scary face to face. But it's fairly easy to do online, and actually they're sitting looking into each other's eyes on screen. But again, that could be a challenge if the technology doesn't work or the people are not pointed in the direction. Interruptions, I'm sure many of us have seen lots of things during lockdown that have happened. Lots of stories, some not for this session. So it is tiring, but there will be interruptions. And for me, I just made sure I was aware of the personal situation in the house. For example, the gentleman said, how long will it be for my meeting? I will make sure that my wife takes the kids to the park during that time. But children may pop in and out of the session, the door might go, and more regular breaks may be required that way, or actually find out what time would be good for a break. The process is so important, and the least bit of interruption might just throw someone off track, and it might be hard to get them back on again. So find out what time they expect a visitor to come to the door, what time their children might need a snack, for example, and just work around that. Be very careful of using free platforms as well, where there may be, for example, a 40-minute break. But as the mediator, it's really good because it should kind of time down for you and have a wee timer in the top of the screen. So make sure that you're even cutting that short, or make sure that you're in with that time. But actually, those 40-minute breaks may be quite welcomed to both parties, because it may be quite exhausting sitting in front of the screen. So it may be an option that more regular breaks are required. The pitfalls of sharing your screen, be aware. So you may decide in a one-to-one, face-to-face, you may have a whiteboard, but through technology we need to find other ways for both parties to see that agreement. So the session I was on, we shared the whiteboard, so I minimised the videos and I shared my screen to the whiteboard, but be very careful what else you have in the background, particularly maybe confidential items, maybe anything else that maybe another party just shouldn't see. So make sure when you're sharing your screen that literally your emails and everything are gone. It should just be nothing other than that whiteboard. There's no chat function face-to-face, which is a benefit. I've got to say the challenge was in one of my particular sessions, one party was communicating the whole way through the session with me, getting off their chest, this woman is being ridiculous, this woman is being unreasonable, this woman is toxic, and that could have been very off-putting for me, but not also that. When sharing the screen, you need to be careful that the other party doesn't see. So getting familiar with the technology and maybe setting up so that private messaging does not happen, because really there should be no other conversations. If they want to have a personal conversation, there needs to be some kind of code, whether it's the raise of the hand, that you maybe put them into another breakout room and then come back. But it's very off-putting with the chat function at the side. And again, the body language is important. So if I'm too busy reading down the other person, I do remember in one of the sessions, my chair was very uncomfortable and I kept moving. Both parties were so still and I felt that I wasn't looking like I was giving attention. I absolutely was, but it was very off-putting. So practicing the poker face pose when you're on screen. Some of the parties were rolling their eyes, and for me, face-to-face, it didn't have the same impact as what it did online, because it was exaggerated for some reason. The person says, I can see that you're sitting rolling your eyes right now. So just be careful of your body language as well, being the mediator, if that's the situation. Unwanted visitors as well, the whole Zoom bombing, everything that we've heard and seen about. So making sure that the session is set up, that you're having to let visitors in, or the conversation is locked. It's all in the setup. So making time to make sure that it's all the way that it needs to be with maximum security. And I've called it the big switch off. Mediation is completely voluntary. At any time when it's too much, a party can go for a break or just withdraw from the whole process. For me, online mediation is easier just for me right now to go, sorry guys, I've had enough, and that's me gone. It has much more of an impact than someone saying I need to leave the room a minute. So for me, the challenge is it has more effect. So how do you get in touch with the person when they've said they've had too much and they've left in a calm manner? when they've turned off their computer, it's much easier for the person to do. Obviously, as I said, the session is completely voluntary, but it would be advisable that they try and hang on as much as possible. But that's out of your hands. And what's the plan B? So if the technology fails, what's your plan? So I had done another link just in case the link for whatever reason froze. So maybe having that and sending that out to both parties in the event that the technology fails, or another platform, or simply because we are online at the moment, it's all about maybe email addresses, but making sure you're getting both parties' mobile numbers in the event that you have to reach them quite urgently if a plan B has to happen. And again, that challenge of bringing back the conversation as well. But for me, although there looks a lot of challenges on the screen, it's definitely just things for you to think about, to work through, because for me, the benefits absolutely outweigh the challenges, and it will be good to see how people take this forward in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Graham and Natalie. I mean, I've learned a lot so far from what you've said, and I'm sure we'll have some interesting questions. I was laughing when I was thinking about interruptions at the very beginning with my doorbell ringing, and you know, my plan B should have been to make sure my 16-year-old son knew not to continually ring the doorbell to get in. So just, I guess this is a human thing, isn't it, about everything being virtual. So we've had a couple of questions so far, so if it's okay if I can pose those to you, and please, the rest of you do post your comments, observations and questions. So the first question from Angela is, I think many people think of ACAS when it comes to mediation. How does ACAS align with this in terms of mediation? So, Graham, I don't know if you want to start off by answering that.
Yeah, I mean, I think ACAS have played a really good role in promoting mediation over the period of their existence. And certainly from my perspective, I'd recognise their role. They do quite a lot of training for in-house mediators who may be doing so through a particular ACAS scheme. And I think that's a positive contribution because from my perspective, the important thing is that people have access to mediation. And as long as the people who are trained in the right way, then I think that's a good thing. And certainly my knowledge of the ACAS training is that it's a good training. I think there's also a key role for ACAS because there's the pre-claims conciliation that's offered if you're going to an employment tribunal. Personally, I would hope that people would be thinking about mediation before then, but it's at least another opportunity for that to be put on the table. I don't think there's a particular clash between the sorts of things that are offered by individual mediators and ACAS in the sense that ACAS isn't particularly into doing small private mediations or disputes within firms. It's more concerned with some of the larger disputes, perhaps still around the old image of beer and sandwiches between the trade union and the large employer. But that's a more traditional role that ACAS has played. And so my view is that they provide overall a really good service, and one which complements that which can be offered by the range of mediators who are available, particularly through, say, for example, the Scottish Mediation Register.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Graham. If it's okay if I can move on, Natalie, because we've had a couple of other questions that I think you can contribute to. The other question next is, are you seeing disputes increasing during the current crisis? And then if I think the next question, which you could probably answer together, is what are the approximate costs per day for a virtual session? I don't know which one of you would like to pick those two up. So are disputes increasing, and what's the cost per day of a virtual session? I guess probably in comparison to what it would be face-to-face.
Graham, are you happy to pick that up again?
I'll pick up the first one if that's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because certainly in terms of our disputes increasing, I was doing a little bit of analysis on our helpline figures just the other day, just because I wanted to understand what had been happening. And initially things went a bit quiet. So the first couple of weeks of lockdown, our telephones, they didn't stop ringing, but they certainly went through the floor, because I think people were very much concentrated on making the changes that they needed to make for their businesses to keep going. And I think that certainly shut down. But interestingly, as we reached into the middle of April and coming through May, the number of calls over that total period have been the same as last year, which suggests that there has actually been more things that people have come forward on. So you would probably say that there's been a slight increase, and that things have picked up. Over the past couple of days, we've also just launched a COVID-19 mediation service, and that's particularly designed around disputes that are arising out of the lockdown, whether that's within a house, between a landlord and a tenant, between people and their workplace. And so it'll be interesting to see if the publicity around that generates a further pickup. I don't know if you want to cover on from your perspective in terms of how costs work, Natalie?
Yes, no problem. So I guess it depends in terms of how many parties are involved. So what you would be looking at, say there's two parties in a workplace, where you have two individuals, they would have an hour and a half to 2 hours each, and then the joint meeting could be 3 to 4 hours in total. So you're looking at a full day, and certainly from Scottish mediation, there would be certain items that they would consider, whether it be third sector, etc. And the range could be round about £90 an hour plus that. So for a full day, you're probably looking, it really depends on how many parties and what time. Some clients want to bring the cost down, so they may just have an hour each and then a 2-hour session in the afternoon. We would talk through the benefits of what that would be, but we try and obviously work around clients' budgets as well, to see, because it's important to resolve disputes, and we want to work with businesses to make sure that we can do that. So if cash flow at these particular times is an issue, then we would obviously have a look at that as well.
I mean, I'd probably add to that for the third sector mediation scheme, and it's mainly designed at third sector organisations, if their turnover is between 50 and 250, then we might do an all-day rate of £300 at a flat rate. And the same applies to the COVID mediation scheme. So we're doing that. We've got a volunteer panel which will deal with cases from individuals or organisations of up to 5 people on COVID issues. We will be doing that pro bono. For organisations with more than 5, we'll do it for a flat rate of £300. So there's various different access points that might be available, and we would certainly want to talk you through what the best one for you would be.
Okay, thank you both. And Angela's commenting, so a lot deeper than lawyers, and I couldn't possibly comment on that, Angela, but thanks for the observation. And the next question is from Deborah. So, do you hold the pre-meeting differently to prepare attendees for online versus face-to-face? Natalie, I don't know if that's more for you.
Yes, no, absolutely. So the pre-meeting, no, not really, because you're just doing what you would do face-to-face. Obviously, you do need to talk a bit more about this, a wee bit more in depth about the technology, showing them maybe speaker view, what might happen and talking about. But actually, no, not to be honest. There's just no travel there. But obviously, your main point is trying to build rapport and trust with that individual as well. So I wouldn't say it's particularly different, maybe just a wee bit more in depth about the technology and what's the plan B and finding out their individual needs. But you would be doing that face to face anyway. For example, if someone can't sit for long periods of time, you would need to know that in the pre-meeting. So no, absolutely not. It's not given any more occasion for holding the meeting any differently.
Okay, no, thank you. And I have another question for you, Natalie. As an experienced community mediator, I'm used to a comprehensive set of ground rules that we share as a document and reiterate at the beginning of the joint meeting. This is a question from Tony. Have you developed a set of virtual ground rules?
Okay, So the rules would be very similar to the face-to-face, but you may add in some additional. And sharing those, the question always comes up, well, how do you share those? You can share your screen and share those and ask if anybody else. So the same as making sure it's not being recorded, etc. That is a lot harder, obviously, online, but you're getting their consent and they're signing the confidentiality agreement anyway. But in terms of virtual, I guess it's all around, like Graham right now could be recording and we don't know, he could be texting and we don't know. So it's making sure that you're looking at those cues as well as the mediator. The mediator's following these cues to make sure the ground rules are not being broken anyway. But the same would apply face-to-face in terms of derogatory comments or swearing, etc. All of those particular ground rules would still be covered online, but you may have a couple of others. For example, it has to still be in a quiet place as well. It won't be effective if they're in a busy dining room with people all around. So you may have some that we can help with, yeah.
And another question specifically for you, from Tony again. Have you managed any multi-party disputes online or just two parties so far? This is for Natalie.
Three parties, and I guess it's just a slightly more complex, but it's okay, it can be done, but make sure you're familiar with the technology.
We had comments on this yesterday at a meeting of mediators that we'd had, and one of the main things that, because there was a number of parties and a number of lawyers who were involved, and the mediator was saying that particularly in those circumstances it was really helpful having somebody who was working some of the technology sitting alongside when it got that bit more complex, but that what was really important was making sure in advance of the meeting that you'd named the breakout rooms so you knew who was going where, you'd allocated the people to those rooms, but also then thought, I might need a couple of spare rooms during the mediation if I, for example, wanted to have a conversation with the lawyers only or with the parties only, which hadn't necessarily been part of the plan for the mediation, but was something which was worth planning for, because doing that at the time whilst trying to mediate and set it up would become a distraction for you as the mediator, which the parties then might view as your disinterest or not concentrating on what they were saying. So I think the message which Natalie was saying there, I definitely concur with other mediators have said, is in terms of plan ahead.
Okay, no, thank you both. Now, has anyone else got any other questions that they would like to pose to Natalie and Graham? But while people are thinking, I've got one, if that's okay. So you've very much talked about the process of mediation online. So what happens if a settlement's reached, which hopefully in many cases it is? Is the process the same afterwards? Or is there anything in this kind of COVID world, online world, that needs to be done differently?
You want to go first, Natalie?
No, you go first this time.
Okay. I think it depends on the nature of the agreement that you're getting people to sign. And one of the things that I would normally want to do is to show people what the agreement actually said, show them the piece of paper. Depending on how affirmative you need people's agreement to go forward, you would either think about whether you want people to email their confirmation or whether you need something which is more legalistic in terms of a particular way of signing a document. So that might be, you might ask somebody to print it out, sign it, scan it and PDF it. And so you probably need to take into account what people had in their homes if people weren't in the office, and what you might need to do to get beyond that. But I think the main things are really making sure that what's written in the agreement is agreed and understood, and making sure that people are happy and that it covers what it needs to cover. That would be the main things I would be thinking about. I don't know if you've got anything you would add to that, Natalie?
No, I guess it's for the parties. It's all about how am I getting this document back? I'm not in work with a scanner with all the technology. So you're right. It's mainly about the technology to get that in the recognition that they are okay with it.
Lee, it's Suzanne here. There are a couple other questions that have just been sent to the host privately. Shall I just read them out?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
So what would you recommend in the situation where a mediation session appears to be successful and both individuals think it's been helpful, then after a weekend of reflection are both unhappy? Do you recommend a follow-up session, or would that just be a regurgitation of the first session? So, Natalie, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, interesting in terms of what was the weekend event. Now, normally we would not be doing a review probably until maybe 3 months, unless other parties has agreed. So we would want to see what actually happens at that weekend, and does it have a massive bearing on the agreement? Does it change anything, or again, was it just another blip? It may need further mediation, because maybe someone didn't get something out that they really needed to, and it's critical. Other than that, it may just be left and then picked up later at a review. But remember, it's all about the way forward, and it's down to what both parties want. It's not down to me what the future is, it's down to what parties think that is necessary to move that relationship forward.
I was going to say, I would add to that Natalie's right about wanting to explore what is the reason that there has been the change. And one of the things that quite often the mediators will do at the time of agreement is to make sure, they'll do it at the beginning of the meeting, to make sure that everyone who is involved in the decision is in the room. And sometimes partners can have a really large impact when somebody talks something over with somebody, which can then potentially put a spanner in the works of an agreement. So it might depend on what it is, but my sense is that if it's something fairly significant, if you don't discuss it, then there's going to be a problem. So you will need to, but it's in the mediation trying to make sure that the person is giving their agreement, knowing, if you like, who they're likely then to discuss it with afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Suzanne.
No, that's okay. We're kind of running out of time. There are some other questions there, but maybe answer them offline.
Yeah, there's one from Jacqueline. Have you had to navigate the impact of furloughing in current employment mediations where mediation process may already have started? Goodness, which one of you would like to answer that?
I could say no.
Not as yet, but we've got to remember that furloughing, the job retention scheme, is still on until the end of October. So I guess we're sitting watching this space, because I guess there are some people that are thinking, we'll just wait, we've got too much going on right now, but actually it would be better to get it sorted right now so that when everyone comes back to work, we can hit the ground running and the dispute is hopefully made rather than having to start afresh and waiting for face-to-face.
Thank you. And we do have a couple of other questions, so we should be able to get through them if you can bear with me. Angela's asking, do you find HR professionals want to get involved in mediation sessions?
Certainly, I was going to say experiences that sometimes they will do, and part of process is actually to say to them, no, it's not really for you to be involved. But then I think at the same time, if somebody's asking that question, as a mediator, I would be wanting to say, so what would you like to know about it? What would you like to know about what we're doing? Because maybe it's coming from a position of not having that knowledge, and the lack of that knowledge causing a concern about what they don't know.
My experience has been when HR professionals maybe want to get involved, they will forget that it's a completely different process. It's out with maybe any current issue that's going on, whether that be a grievance, for example. So it's completely different. So yes, they may be involved in the grievance stage, but the mediation is a completely separate process.
Okay, no, thank you. We've also had a question which kind of relates. Are people open to online mediation at the moment? So I don't know if that's referring to HR or just generally folk. Have you had any people say no, I guess? Maybe that's what's aiming at.
Was very sceptical over the phone and was like, will this work? And actually they were like, wow, that was great. But I think people need to be aware of the decision between going online or delaying the process until an inevitable return to work. But who knows when that will be. But I guess they need to see for themselves, and proof will be in the pudding if it's worked or not when they see the relationship with both parties at the end of it.
We certainly had some of our mediators are work in HR consultancy as well, and I know that some of them have been doing a number of different HR processes. So they might have been doing investigations during the lockdown and doing that online, and other different aspects as well. And my thought would be that where there's something that needs to be progressed, putting it on hold, ultimately, I don't think is going to be satisfactory for people.
Thank you for those. Just one other so far, it looks like. So, which you can squeeze in. Do you add in a resilience type clause in a mediation agreement that advises what the parties might do themselves if what's agreed in a mediation breaks down? I.e., do they agree to meet themselves to reset their plan or come straight back to the mediator? Do you have a preference, either of you, to answer? Which is your last question.
Natalie would be good at answering that question.
That is a great question, and I guess the answer, you're getting people to think about these resilience type questions throughout. But in terms of the agreement, there would be obviously what the path and where they go if they don't feel the relationship is going the way or the agreement is being broken. Then certainly they would come back to the mediator. But the resilience part is mainly during, I would say it's not so much at the agreement stage, it's where they're having their exchange. Graham, would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think so, because I think one of the things you would want to explore before you were actually coming to an agreement would be, so what happens in the future? What happens if you fall out, you have a disagreement, there's concerns about maybe what the original issue around the mediation was. So I think it would make sense to have that discussion before you're just about to write things down. But it's often the case that in agreements you will have something which says, and should so happen again, you either A, might want to try and resolve it yourselves first, or B, you might need to come back to mediation.
Okay, well, great. Thank you for that. And we've managed to answer all of our questions, or at least the ones I can notice in the chat box, but I've been paying attention. So perfect timing. We have a minute left. So it just takes me to, I guess, thanks to both of our contributors to the session today, and to all of you that posed questions, listened and participated in the discussion. This is such an interesting time for us, and it's a new virus. It's unclear how long this threat will last, and how long what our experiences will be of returning to the workplace. And I guess we need to plan for months of potential disruption, and this is such a great solution to continue the important solution that mediation can be. And I did have a question which we won't answer right now, but a point to reflect on is I do wonder what the world will look like in mediation, after all of this. Will it still continue to be online? I suspect so. So we've learned a lot about how online mediation works, how it's different, challenges, benefits. Hopefully you've picked up a lot of very practical tips as well. I know I have. I just wanted to leave you with a couple of parting thoughts and links, and we'll circulate the slides so that you can get the links. But it would be very remiss of me not to mention CIPD's Coronavirus Hub. So those of you who are members, but also it's open not to people who aren't members, and it's a great resource. I also mentioned earlier that we have lots of fact sheets and guidance open to our members on mediation. So if you are a CIPD member and not aware of them already, go and look at our guides and our fact sheets. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of a new member benefit for ours in times. So we provided a new wellbeing helpline service to CIPD members, which is a new member benefit which not everyone's aware of. So I wanted to kind of raise that with you. And finally, we have our next Scottish Policy Forum event for our members and non-members coming up next week, which we're launching our first Scotland Working Lives report. So, if you can, do join us then. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll finish now. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good afternoon.